Greeting, stranger. Another rainstorm has been unleashed onto us from above, I see, and so we have once again found ourselves sheltering amongst all my books and papers. Praise Nethys that I remembered to bring my copy of the Encyclopaedia Galarianensis along with me, for it is within its pages from which our next lawful insights may be divined. Specifically, I have been pondering on a particular family of undead beings whose members' ubiquity is rivaled only by the volume of misinformation circulating around them. I refer to the creatures known as Ghouls, the hungry devourers of corpses. Their pale and pointed bodies have stalked many a graveyard after the sun sets, and many a gravekeeper has suffered at their clawed hands attempting to stop them. From the depths of the Darklands to the high plateaus of Varisia, these necrophages have plagued civilization throughout all of recorded history, and doubtless for years uncountable before that. Yet few are even aware of Ghoul's sentience, let alone their concerning intelligence, and even fewer are familiar with the depths and intricacies of ghoulish society, which stretches deep into the caverns of Secca Minor and even transcends this plane of existence into eldritch dimensions. So, come, take a pew, and I will recount to you ghoulish lore, and render you possibly more disturbed, but certainly better prepared to handle your next encounter with these insidious undead beings. It is difficult to organize an exposition on ghouls, for the realities of their quotidian existence are contrasted sharply with how they are usually perceived. This discrepancy has arisen because most interactions between organized society and ghouls are not on equal footing. A typical encounter is not with the pinnacle of ghoulish civilization, but with its equivalent of a rabid vagabond. Do not misunderstand me, most ghouls would readily kill you on the spot, and then bury your corpse for later. But most would at least make it clear in doing so that they are just as intelligent and cunning as any living person. Indeed, given enough time, a ghoul can become a bastion of wisdom and lore, for being undead gives one plenty of time to accumulate knowledge. The Encyclopaedia Galarianensis describes a typical ghoul as a gaunt, pallid creature, only vaguely reminiscent of the being it once was in life. The fingers have extended into wicked claws fit for crude burrowing, and now hold a potent paralytic. The face has stretched into an elven parody of its former self, and most notably, the ears and teeth have extended and filed themselves into points. The limbs, while proportionally not dissimilar to their earlier appearance, have nevertheless stretched somewhat, making the specimen taller than a man at full height. Seldom is this witnessed, however, for a ghoul spends much of its existence hunched, squat, prone, or otherwise curled into a smaller space. One would be forgiven for classifying such a figure as little more than a monster on looks alone. As one scholar put it, ghouls were made in mockery of the elves, being every bit as lithe and tall and cunning. And it is true, peasant wisdom holds that humans reanimated by necromancy turn into zombies, while elves turn into ghouls. This is, of course, nonsense, though there is a kernel of mistruth fueling the rumour, in that elves are actually immune to the sinister disease called ghoul fever that produces new specimens. Thus, despite resembling elves in some way, one can be almost certain that no ghoul was an elf in life. But I am getting ahead of myself. Before we discuss ghoul fever and the many ways new ghouls can come into existence, we ought to acknowledge where one might encounter them. The answer can be deduced once one understands the driving force behind ghoulish existence. Hunger. Specifically, hunger for dead flesh, though living flesh will prove equally suitable if necessary. Being undead creatures, ghouls do not need to consume anything to survive, yet their sentience, and ghouls are quite sentient no matter what anyone tells you, comes at a cost. For a ghoul experiences emotions and compulsions more readily than any living being, and they are sensitive to hunger most of all. Unfortunately, because they do not gain any nutritional benefit from any food, fleshy or otherwise, this hunger can never truly be satiated. Consequently, a newly spawned ghoul often finds that hunger overwhelms their unlife, and thus it will not surprise a learned individual to discover that these beings are wont to make their homes in and around graveyards, burial pits, morgues, and other adjacent locations. In larger settlements, where walls protect burial grounds, ghoul communities often migrate to the sewage systems that thread beneath the feet of the living, emerging after dark to drown and marinate victims in their own filth before consuming them after putrefaction begins. Were ghouls simply mockeries of the living, there would be little cause for concern. While a ghoul is certainly more agile, hardier, and stronger than your average human, the difference is not so extreme as to make one a serious threat to organized resistance. However, unlike many undead, whose existences begin on a predictable yet ultimately ad hoc basis, ghouls can reproduce. What's more, they can reproduce quickly. And worst of all, they reproduce not by coupling with one another, but by condemning and converting the living. Every ghoul is a carrier for one of the most horrific diseases to plague Galadian, an infection of the body and spirit known simply as ghoul fever. It is contained within the ghoul's saliva, which, needless to say, is not true saliva, but rather a serum bearing ghoul fever into victims of its bite. Once within the bloodstream, ghoul fever requires about 24 hours to show symptoms, which present as a lassitude and lethargy towards daily life, and a total loss of appetite. Soon afterwards, the body begins to waste away, as though the victim was starving even if they had been heartily fed when they became infected. Over the course of only a few days, the most rotund individual can lose over half of their body mass, all the while swearing not to desire food in any form. Contrary to the disease's name, pyrexia is not actually a symptom of the disease, although it is not uncommon for additional secondary infections to have been transferred by a ghoul's bite as well, which goes some way to explain the confusion. Hardier individuals might last the better part of a week before succumbing to the infection, and like any disease, many recover naturally. Nevertheless, the calculated fatality rate is as high as 20%, rising exponentially if recovery is not made within the first 2 days of symptoms, for restoring vitality to someone so afflicted is notoriously difficult. The true horror, of course, begins only after a victim has passed on. Roughly 24 hours later, on the very stroke of midnight, a corpse slain by ghoul fever will rise again as a newborn ghoul, continuing the cycle. Epidemiologists in Absalom, Almus, Agorian, well, everywhere, really, have been calling for greater awareness about the potential of a so-called ghoul apocalypse for years, and so far most have refused to entertain the idea. Contrary to popular belief, zombies cannot create new zombies, but the ones responsible for starting that rumour have successfully siphoned off the metaphorical air from the public consciousness around ghouls. Personally, I do not think the ghoul apocalypse is very likely, as infected corpses can be destroyed before reanimating, and most ghouls prefer to avoid the living in favour of devouring corpses if possible. Still, one should never say never, and remain vigilant always. There are naturally other methods of creating ghouls. Necromancers can instill the curse of ravenous hunger into a body and turn it into a ghoul as they can with almost any kind of corpse by means of the Create Undead ritual. Consuming the flesh of a ghoul also invariably begins a transformation into a specimen, although it is not clear whether this is a distinct method or simply an exercise in infecting oneself with ghoul fever. Some dark bestiaries also report that turning to cannibalism can guarantee reanimation as a ghoul after death, though I have found this method difficult to test ethically, for obvious reasons. Finally, a crystal found in abundance in the caverns of Seca Minor known as lazurite emits a faint but ceaseless necromantic discharge of energy which, when allowed to smother corpses for long enough, permits them to return to unlife as ghouls. Lazurite appears as bands of thin, black crust within Marrowstone, another Darklands rock. It is not powerful enough to pose a threat to the living by itself, but be sure to remove any bodies from its vicinity post-haste. Just as there are many methods of ghoul creation, so are there many distinct creatures within the ghoul family. Advanced ghoul societies further make use of other kinds of undead, particularly festrogs, called ghoul dogs by the living, and scavelings, or ghoul bats. However, it is important to note that these entities are not true ghouls. Also, some scholars have attempted to classify subtypes of ghoul based on behavior alone, ghoul stalkers and ghoul hunters and so forth. This is a rather pointless taxonomy because it describes the behavior of individuals, not groups. Yes, some ghouls are sneakier than others, but this is true of any sentient being. On the other hand, the larger, more powerful creatures known as Ghasts are undoubtedly distinct members of the ghoul family and should be avoided at all costs. A Ghast resembles a ghoul in many respects. Visually, they appear slightly fuller in body and deeper in skin, but it is their extraordinarily repulsive smell that distinguishes them from their more common kin. A Ghast's stench renders a victim more vulnerable to its disease, which itself is a more virulent strain of ghoul fever, creatively called Ghast fever. Not only is the fatality rate for Ghast fever within a typical population 25%, it is also more difficult to treat, and elves are not immune to it. This means that, proportionally, elves are encountered as Ghasts far more often than they are as ghouls. Ghast paralysis is similarly more powerful, and the strength they take from recently deceased flesh even more potent. Now, while most ghouls are confined to the land, sailors and boatmen should not settle into complacency. Another distinct ghoul variant known as a Lacedon precludes this. These amphibious ghouls are comparable to Ghasts in their ferocity, and their bodies sprout bony protrusions reminiscent of spinefish fins. Lacedons live in large bodies of water, and seem to prefer drowning sailors to making their way onto land. However, that does not mean they are incapable of it. In fact, Lacedons congregate into packs of several dozen members, and can work themselves into a frenzy for land flesh on occasion. At these times, the ghouls will emerge from the water and descend upon an unsuspecting village in the depths of the night, and come sunrise, only bloodstains will tell the story of the village's grisly fate. There also exists another amphibious variant known as a Barnacle ghoul. While Ghasts are only marginally stronger than the standard land-based ghoul, Barnacle ghouls are exceptionally strong when compared to Lacedons. They are also visually striking, being uniquely large and round, even fat by ghoulish standards. As their name implies, Barnacle ghouls have a supernatural command over barnacles, which they cultivate on their bodies to give them impressive climbing ability even when out of the water. They can also cause brackish water to expand, a talent they leverage to drown their victims. This process is also the equivalent of ghoul fever for the amphibious ghoul variants. There are many other kinds of ghoul, though they are almost exclusively relegated to organized ghoul society, and are better classified as roles rather than variants. And yes, organized ghoul society does indeed exist. Ghouls are in fact rather social creatures. They can understand and speak Necril, the strange undead language, and they often come to worship the demon lord Cabriri, whose areas of concern are graves, the secrets kept by the dead, and naturally, ghouls themselves. Without the guiding efforts of civilized ghouls, though, it is unlikely that a feral pack finds the strength to organize itself effectively. Do not forget the ravenous hunger driving all ghoul kind at all times. It is nigh impossible to suppress without careful training. Despite these challenges, there does exist a hidden ghoul civilization, a bastion for the accursed undead. Located deep within the Darklands, in the caverns of Secca Minor underneath the border between Assyrian and Thuvia in Garund, lies the ancient city of Nemret Noktoria. Constructed chiefly from marrowstone and supported by columns of pure lazarite, Nemret Noktoria was built to embody Everglut, the abyssal layer home to him who gnaws. It is ruled by Kortash Kane, an undead ghoul who is, without question, one of Galarian's most powerful spellcasters. Kane is also dedicated completely to his demon lord, and wishes to turn all Secca Minor into a material Everglut. Visiting Nemret Noktoria will prove difficult, as, while there are non-ghouls living there, the surrounding miles of caverns have been completely depopulated, save for Kane's infamous capture squads. These elite teams abduct and slay all they find, turning those they can into ghouls, and those they can't into food for their larders. If you should ever find yourself exploring the Underdark in Western Assyrian, be extremely careful. Finally, you must permit me also to speak about the Ghouls of Leng, for they are utterly unique, even by Ghoul standards. Leng is a mysterious demiplane, accessible only through the dimension of dreams. Very few scholars have even heard of it, and most of those who have understand it only as a sort of nightmare counterpart to the Dreamlands. This is a flawed understanding of the Plateau of Leng, though it does give the correct emotional overview for what visiting it is like. It is a freezing realm of aberrations, insanity, and the void itself. The winds there sound like the screams of the mortal minds unfortunate enough to touch it within their own restless thoughts. Few who venture there return, and of those who do, none remain unchanged. Yet even in Leng can ghouls be found, so universal is the curse of their existence. Leng ghouls are significantly more sophisticated than their material counterparts, and they possess the ability to experience the memories and insights of those whose flesh they consume. Consequently, there is no difference between eating and studying to a Leng ghoul, and their so-called corpse libraries can be a challenge even for veteran scholars to appreciate. Perhaps even more impressive is the fact that, while ghouls are not natural mages, Leng ghouls are capable of casting spells from scrolls, or at least attempting to. Well, stranger, that is my overview of ghouls. As you can tell, there is much that has been omitted or simplified by necessity. Ghouls are like humans, elves or dwarves, and offering a singular, total summary on all their varieties and quirks would be misleading at best, and deadly at worst. I think appreciating this diversity is of paramount importance, lest you be caught off guard by one in the future. That said, I should stress that most ghouls you encounter will be little more than feral beasts, for it takes great patience and effort to shake a ghoul's hunger and make room for rationality. Well, let's thank Hanspur that there have been no reports of Lacedons in the River Andershan for many years now, and continue our journey northwards. We will be passing by Oregont very soon, the capital of the Darkmoon Vale, and the true home of the Lumber Consortium. Its story makes for quite the tale, let me tell you. But in about an hour. I need a little rest first. Well, until then.